Yo, welcome to another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. Today we have a very special guest. We have Ck Snarks. He was the general manager of Bitcoin Magazine, and he left to join the Human Rights Foundation. So we're going to talk to him about that. Really excited for the show. Haven't talked to Ck in a minute. I think the last time I saw him in person was in Nashville. But before we jump into it, I want to give a shout out to the company that makes this show possible. Swan Bitcoin, best place to build your Bitcoin stack. Check them out today. Go to swan.com/simply. If you buy $100 worth of Bitcoin, I think you get $10 free. It's the best place to build your Bitcoin stacks being built by Bitcoiners. It's for Bitcoiners. Visit swan.com today. All right, everybody, no more delay. Let's bring up the man, the myth, the legend himself.
Thank you for the introduction, bro.
How you doing, bro?
Life is great.
Is it great?
Fantastic.
Is it great? Lots of change ups, bro. Lots of change ups for you, dude. So
yeah, man.
How many years were you at Bitcoin Mag?
Was at Bitcoin Mag since February 2018.
Wow. Okay. And then what was it like when you joined?
Really different company, man. Multi-coin company.
Okay.
Small. Well, so the funny thing is that like BTC Inc. has definitely ridden the bull bear market wave. So when I got brought on, the company was like 80 people, and then I kind of like ground down with the company down to like 12 people, and then we brought it all the way up to like 120 people, and then I think now it's like 60 people.
So it's a Bitcoin company is what you're saying.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, no, it was like for me, the Bitcoin only industry, like a big part of its development was Bitcoin Magazine going Bitcoin only. Because that was the first, because Bitcoin only like was very, I would say like it was a community thing. It was a grassroots thing. But from like a business perspective, there was only multi-coin. So Bitcoin, it wasn't like Bitcoin Magazine was the only player here. Blockstream was like a very early Bitcoin only company, but Bitcoin Magazine going from like explicitly multi-coin to, hey, we're gonna only focus on Bitcoin. We're gonna drop our multi-coin blockchain conferences. We're gonna effectively popularize the Bitcoin only conference, which now is a complete phenomenon. It was pretty cool.
And let's talk about that, right? Because and I remember that explicitly. I do remember that. That was like it was like 2020, the rise of Bitcoin only companies before it was crypto, right? And then the rise of Bitcoin only media, right? Which, like you said, Bitcoin Magazine was an integral part of that. But also, a lot of the podcasters that we know of today, right? Like Odell, TFTC, the Breedloves, the Natalies, the McCormacks, et cetera, et cetera. And they all really rode that wave. Like before that wave, like they had big followings, but not stratosphere followings, right? It was really that like 2020, 2021 that really gave the Bitcoin only media a shot. It was crypto, it was commingled before, like you said. So how was that like? Did you those early days, that pioneering, did you even think that it was a viable business model going Bitcoin only?
Yeah, no, I definitely thought that. So Aaron Van Werdum and I were kind of like the two really big proponents for it. Bitcoin Magazine now is like almost 100% Bitcoin maximalists on staff. But back then it was like 20% Bitcoin maximalists on staff, and then like 40% crypto people, and then like 40% like just people working a job at a startup company. People working at startup media companies and so working at an event company. Like a bunch of that, like to a bunch of people, that's how they saw BTC Inc. But Van Werdum and I, we really were pitching this to leadership, saying like, unless we go Bitcoin only, like what differentiator do we have? Right? We're just like this, but worse, or we just like this, but smaller, or just like this, but slower. What we really had was the history and Bitcoin, and like at our heart, like we had leadership that were Bitcoin maximalists. So, and to be honest, you got to give credit where credit is due. David Bailey is just a ballsy mofo. So like he had the balls to, pretty much just like experiment with a brand new business model that had never been proven out before.
Yeah. And no, and dude, it was really interesting days, dude. The infancy, like I call it, of Bitcoin only companies, Bitcoin only media is very, very young, this phenomenon, right? And yeah,
We're early.
we're so early. We are so early. I completely agree with that. Okay. So fast forward, right? You pitched it. Obviously, it was a massive success. Congratulations, CK. But what was that like? What was like, because of course, you come up with an idea, but it's very different when that idea comes to fruition, right? So what was that like? You joined 2018, things accelerated very quick. I feel like you joined at the right time, at the perfect time, right? That's like the year after the peak of the 2017 bull market, right? You
No, no,
joined.
no. I joined as it was sliding off the peak.
Okay.
I joined at the worst time. I mean, maybe a good time to be influential of the company, but in terms of like, heads were rolling.
Yeah.
I think I saw like I was like so low level during that bear market. Like the all I knew is that I made the cuts. I didn't know anything about like the layoffs. Whereas like on this most recent bear market, um, you know, I was in charge. So like it was like that was like on my back, and it was brutal.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine, having all those people kind of, looking up and all that. So, okay. So you were at Bitcoin Mag, that's how you started your career and all that stuff. And then you recently announced, that's really what I want to talk about. You joining Alex and the Human Rights Foundation. So congratulations, CK. That's incredibly
Thank
awesome.
you. Yeah, and I'm honored and really excited, and I've been there for going on 6 weeks now, and bullish, so bullish. Gladstein has, he's the visionary here, and he's built something really remarkable, and I'm really hoping we can just make it, that much better and that much more efficient and much more productive. I think that would be really good for Bitcoin if we got the Bitcoin Development Fund and the financial freedom apparatus at HRF to just be better.
And then for anyone who doesn't know, like, what is the purpose of the Human Rights Foundation? Like, what is the mission? How does it differentiate from like Bitcoin Magazine, for example?
Oh wow, yeah, no, HRF and Bitcoin Magazine are very different. I think like they're different and similar. Like both are very interested in human sovereignty, prosperity, dignity, freedom. I think both organizations are unified there. Both organizations are unified by Bitcoin. So like, there's a lot of similarities, but obviously, like the organizations are very different. Like, David Bailey will be the first person to tell you that like Bitcoin Magazine is a Bitcoin propaganda, organization. Uh, I really don't think that HRF is that. HRF is. So I want to like I want to make it like very clear. HRF has like a guiding principle and mission as a human rights organization, and then the financial freedom team and the Bitcoin Development Fund, as a subset of that, have our own exclusive uh, goals within our work inside of Bitcoin. So I'll hit on what HRF does, like on a macro level, on an org level, and I can hit on like what the Bitcoin team works on, which is what I'm leading, and I'm gonna like I need to stay in my lane and I need to focus on Bitcoin because I'm not qualified to do and handle the other stuff that HRF is operating in. But yeah, so HRF, we advocate for democracy and we stand against authoritarians and dictators. That is our high level mission. Um, so There's a lot of things that are wrong with the world. There's a lot of things that are wrong with democracies. You know that I prescribe to the sovereign individual thesis, and like, democracies aren't perfect by any means. But in many cases, the freedoms and the sovereignty and the dignity of people within democracies is considerably much higher across the board, and like that's what the Human Rights Foundation is concerned about. So the HRF does not focus on like Europe or the US. We focus on authoritarian states, and their focus is really wide reaching, but ultimately it is to help people in those areas become more sovereign, and become more free, and to hopefully access better governance in the future. So we do that super practically. So we have tons of lawyers and researchers and academics who are getting people out of prison and lobbying like to get people free. Like, we're not talking about like playing the long political game. Like, we're trying to get people, like, we're trying to free people that have been detained for a number of reasons, but we would consider those to be unjust reasons or unlawful reasons. And those are the type of people that we're trying to get out. We're doing programs. HRF has always been technologically forward. So, doing programs like flash drives for freedom in places where the internet is not available. So North Korea, Cuba, things like that, places like that, sending in information packages to try to like, awaken their people of like what the world is like outside of their dictatorship. Um, One of my favorite programs that HRF is doing right now is they have a Uyghur slave labor tracker. So you could, I know Bitcoiners don't like installing extensions, but not everyone HRF interacts with is a Bitcoiner. So we have an extension that pretty much when you're online shopping for clothes, it'll tell you if like this brand is likely using factories that use slave labor for your clothing. So like these are the kind of things that HRF does. We also famously do the Oslo Freedom Forum, which happens every single year in Oslo. And that is a stage for people that have been freed from prison to tell their stories. That is a stage for activists and for kind of I would say like macro level change, and talk about freedom and that activism. Like that's where like in practice it's very different than Bitcoin Magazine. It's just so much more serious. The production value is on both cases very high on their events. So like I think that's a pretty good high level of like HRF. So the financial freedom track. So one of the most interesting things about HRF is because we're technologically advanced, and we see the importance of financial freedom and in someone's ability to be free in general. We were early to Bitcoin, and you can put a lot of that credit to Gladstein. But Gladstein, was early to Bitcoin, created a lot of great work around Bitcoin, created the initiative that is the Bitcoin Development Fund, and was able to get a lot of support for it. And now the Bitcoin Development Fund is very sustainable, and we are trying to fund open source development and community education across the globe, and really focused on, in terms of both education and development, is like initiatives that are going to make Bitcoin more accessible. So right now, Bitcoin is predominantly like all the documentation is in English. So how do we get that in other languages, right? Same with the education and the content. I think AI is going to be a big part of this, but translating all of this content that we're making all the time here on Simply Bitcoin into every other language that is meaningful, that is going to take resources. So we do a lot of translating. We help people that are doing that stuff. We help people that are creating meet spaces for Bitcoiners to come together, whether that's conferences or whether that's third-person spaces that are permanent. That has been kind of like the scope of the work, is development work and community and education work. So on the development side, how do we make Bitcoin more accessible? Okay, so how do you make Lightning Network? How do you have a static QR code for a Lightning Network?
So
we'll put out bounties
hold on.
for that. Yeah,
I'm gonna stop you there because I have a question, right? Which is
go for it.
the importance of propagating democracy, right? and
Sure.
then the importance of Bitcoin as a tool. So how is Bitcoin used as a tool? Like how does Bitcoin help democracy?
Well, I would say like the reason why democracy is important because democracy is a great vehicle for human freedom, and greater human freedom, even if it's not perfect. And then I would say like Bitcoin, the reason why HRF is aligned with Bitcoin is a technological innovation like encryption, like the World Wide Web in general, that is a huge pro for human freedom. And I think when it comes to how Bitcoin is used in practice, um, for dissidents, for journalists, for people who would want to stand up against a dictator, is Bitcoin gives them a way to raise money and have money and use money that can't be frozen easily by that dictator. So we've seen that largely digital money has been a huge tool for dictators. Now the people have digital money, so we have to teach about that, right? Because that increases human freedom, and ultimately, if you want to have a democracy, you need to be able to have press, and you need to be able to organize. And in order to do those things without being completely paralyzed, is you need to be able to have and spend money. So I think we think it's fundamental. And again, that's one of HRF's biggest differentiators is that no one else working in this sphere other than Bitcoiners directly, are doing that. And I honestly think that HRF's narrative around Bitcoin, the human rights narrative, is the most bulletproof. I'll be the first to tell you that you can't be an environmentalist unless you embrace Bitcoin. But the environmental narrative is less bulletproof to a normie. But the humanitarian narrative is, I think, much more bulletproof to a normie, and it's one of the easiest ones to propagate at this stage of Bitcoin, even though it's just one of many positives of this technology.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Interesting. Interesting. Okay. Okay. And I love the way that you described, the way that you described the differences between Bitcoin Magazine and then where you're at in the Human Rights Foundation. Because, Opti and I were joking about this, and of course, we're much younger. We're what, a couple years old. Bitcoin Magazine's over a decade old, right? It's a very well established media organization, media company. And Opti and I realized like about a year and a half in, we're like, dude, like we're propagandists, bro. Like, like straight up, like you come to that conclusion. It's like, we're really just propagandists. Like that's really what we're doing like every single day. And then, you kind of go into the rabbit hole of like, just, the legacy media is just trying to compete for attention, just like you are. Like, how are you going to get people to listen to you rather than to listen to this so-called well-established media organization like the Wall Street Journal dropping fake news, right? But that veneer, I think, is slowly coming off. So yeah, man, so first of all, I'm super happy for you, dude. Congrats. Human Rights Foundation. That's awesome. Absolutely love Alex, love his work. So that's really awesome that you left. So let me ask you something, and perhaps this is a personal question, but you obviously, love Bitcoin Magazine. You built something great there. You built something amazing. Why did you feel like it was the time to take a next step in your life?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I don't really consider myself of like left Bitcoin Magazine 100%. It was I think it was like a very well planned exit where there was a lot of time and planning associated with it, and it was very smooth. And everyone's on super good terms. So I definitely think that there's room. I'm very supportive of them, and there's room for like I'm repping Bitcoin Magazine right now. So there's definitely room for me to be a part of that organization in a much lesser degree in the future. I think with I was involved in every project at Bitcoin Magazine. So the org needed to grow away from someone who does that role. And then two, like there just needs to be time separating me from, that level of responsibility. So, who knows what the future holds. But specifically why it was time for a new challenge was, you know, I just saw that there's so many, that one, for the first time in probably 3 years at Bitcoin Magazine, like I'd been there 5.5 years, but 3 years when I was like a leader, um, it was like kind of clear to me that they didn't really need me. Like everything would be in a good place if I had disappeared, if you will, versus like, things would definitely have fallen apart, um,
Mm,
on several different levels, prior. So like that made me optimistic. And then, I'd just been working a lot and burnt out. So I
mm.
took like 6.5 weeks off and learned how to golf, after I took some time off from Bitcoin Magazine and left.
I envy that. I don't know what that feels like anymore.
It feels great. It feels great. So, I just really acknowledged like it was time for like a life reset for me. And Bitcoin Magazine was in a good spot. Like I feel like I could look back and be super proud and like know that like I feel like they're crushing it. I went to Bitcoin Amsterdam. It was awesome, great success. They did that without me. I left 100 days before that event. Bitcoin Magazine online, their latest Bitcoin Magazine, the Twitter account. They're rocking and rolling, and I know how hard it is for them to be rocking and rolling like they are at this moment. Kind of given going cutting the company in half effectively over the course of 6 months, but at the same time, like proud of those guys. On my end, I didn't get poached or anything like that. I wanted to.
I didn't
Uh,
imply that.
yeah, yeah. No, I just I needed a life change, and then as part of like just having conversations with people I trusted, Gladstein, it was like, hey, you know, I need someone to do this at the financial freedom team, and think it'd be perfect. And we agreed, and then from
Yeah,
there it was just like, how do we make this a reality?
gotcha. So, what's your new role at Human
Yeah, we
Rights
probably should have
Foundation?
started with that. Yeah, no, pretty much. So people don't know this, but like Gladstein's role as the chief strategy officer at HRF, he's in charge of like three different teams, including the Bitcoin team. The Bitcoin team is a financial freedom team. So my title is director of financial freedom, and so my job is to like lead the financial freedom team, which is the Bitcoin team. So it's a huge honor. It's a lot of fun. That what is the job, like what is leading that financial freedom team, that's the Bitcoin development fund. We give uh, quite a bit of money out every single quarter to developers and and community education. And then we're going to be spinning up our own education. So we're going to be spinning up a newsletter in 2 weeks around telling human rights and Bitcoin and human rights stories. So I think this is a resource that you're going to be super interested in at Simply Bitcoin. It's going to create a lot of great educational material for people to share. So I'm super excited about that. And then, we do Bitcoin programming at the Oslo Freedom event. So like a third of the programming is Bitcoin programming at this point. So like HRF is all in on Bitcoin. So we have that. We do a couple of retreats and some summits every year. So I'm busy already, man. We got content, we got events, so we got developers to fund and communities to fund. So doing really great work. And my main job is to give Gladstein back a lot of his time and make sure that the Bitcoin Development Fund and the Financial Freedom Team are running like a well-oiled machine, so he can do his magic full time.
Gotcha. Well, that's again, congratulations. That's awesome. I've always been a big fan of Gladstein's work and the Human Rights Foundation. But I think you buried the lead there, CK, when you were talking about the Oslo Freedom Forum. You said that a third of the programming is about Bitcoin. Is Bitcoin freedom? Does Bitcoin and freedom go hand in hand? I'm sensing something here.
I mean, honestly, I think we're early, we're definitely early to that being a mainstream narrative. But yeah, I mean, HRF is definitely, one, I think we're 100% on board Bitcoin. But the proof is in the pudding. Look at how many resources were given towards our Bitcoin program, and look at how much time in terms of the programming on the Oslo Freedom event, our main stage event that we're giving to Bitcoin. I went to the most recent one this past June. Big reason why I joined the company. VIP event, super elite guest list of Bitcoiners, activists, VIPs in general. Just high impact, high production value, very high quality experience. And I was like, wow, this is a place that knows how to execute and deliver. And it's a place that I could see myself going to.
Gotcha. Gotcha. No, that's awesome, man.
And dude, we're orange pilling all these activists and all these rich guys and everyone else who has been going to Oslo for years before we integrated Bitcoin.
yeah, man. I mean, and I've seen some of those activists. I think you had, which it plays a special role in my heart. I think you had candidates, or essentially opposition candidates from Venezuela, if my memory serves me correctly. I think you hosted one or two.
Leonardo.
Yeah, yeah, and so I think that when I saw that, I was like, really, no one else is really giving these people a platform. But what's going on, I'm talking about Venezuela because it's really, I live in Miami.
That's you, yeah.
I have a there's a lot of Cubans here, but I don't really have family in Cuba. I have family in Venezuela, so I hear what's going on, and it's an absolute tragedy disguised as democracy. But if you look under the hood, it's absolutely not democracy whatsoever. So I'm just
HRF will say that's not democracy.
That's not democracy. So what do you guys define as what a democracy is?
So I'm not the best person to answer that in terms of HRF's official stance. But there's a whole there's very obvious division of power and freedoms and liberties, and a really good indication of is this a real democracy is, can you get paid to make fun of the government? Can you make a living to make fun of the government? And if the answer to that is no, even if there's voting, it's probably a dictatorship, because you can't speak up against the government. So if you can't speak up against the government, it's probably not real democracy. Democracies require, obviously representation and voting to some degree, but they also require a level of free speech and ability to organize that enables opposition to exist and change of power. That's I think some of the key hallmarks.
I think the way that you described it is, can you get paid in your country to make fun of the government? That is so. I think that's the way that I think that's a really fair description. So CK, you're one of the most bullish people that I know. Okay, and I'm pretty bullish. And Opti's, I love you, Opti. Opti's stupid bullish. Okay, he's ultra bullish. Okay, but you are incredibly bullish. And one of the talking points that you say is, we are still early. And then what my bearish response to that would be is, how could you say that? Bitcoin's best days are behind us. The exponential gains, right? Is a lot of, the one full Bitcoin is unaffordable for most people. I'm just reading out the talking points that, we hear millions and millions of times. What has you still so bullish? Why do you feel so optimistic about Bitcoin's future?
Oh man, this is I could spend an hour on this one, and I feel like I'm often a broken record. I guess let's just try to talk about this both theoretically, but from first principles. So what I would say is, most Bitcoiners would agree with me in saying that the reason they're excited about Bitcoin is because it is a paradigm shift. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so if you believe that the reason Bitcoin is so exciting is that it is a paradigm shift, then I think it only makes sense to believe that if it truly is a paradigm shift, then the old paradigm can't exist. Because like think of any other paradigm shift where the old paradigm could also coexist with the new paradigm. I think that
Okay.
that's fair to say. Like, hey, gunpowder is invented. If you don't upgrade to gunpowder, you're done.
Yeah.
Like nuclear is invented. If you don't upgrade to nuclear, you're done. Like you are subordinate now, and that's literally the paradigm dynamic now. It's like the nuclear powers pushing around the non-nuclear powers, and subordinating them. So if Bitcoin is a paradigm shift, the idea that Bitcoin could just be some other asset, could exist with all other assets without demonetizing them, could exist with the dollar without fundamentally changing and warping the dollar to shape to Bitcoin. Like to me, that's an inconsistent belief. So I usually spell this out to say that with Bitcoin, there's three logical scenarios for Bitcoin. Scenario number one is hyper-Bitcoinization, infinity divided by 21 million. Bitcoin is a substrate for value communication, transfer, etc. Situation number two is Bitcoin fails. There can be a number of reasons why Bitcoin fails. Bitcoin could become obsoleted by some other competitor. Bitcoin could be corrupted. I think the most likely scenario for Bitcoin fails is that the game theory is broken, and therefore like the fundamentals of what keeps the network going break down. Because Bitcoin's almost like it's like propelling itself into the future. So like if the game theory breaks, like the shitcoiners will be right, and Bitcoin won't propel itself into the future, if you will. So scenario number two is Bitcoin breaks effectively, and Bitcoin becomes obsolete. No one gives a shit about Bitcoin. Just think about like, hey, we have, the internet stack is built on, what's it called? IP, what's it? IP over whatever. I'm blanking out. Who gives a shit? Who gives a shit? There was actually a protocol war leading up to that. No one thinks about the other protocols. No one talks about the other protocols. Like Bitcoin could be one of those other protocols. I don't think that's the case, but like we have to like have room for that to be a possibility. Possibility number, like logical scenario number three is Bitcoin is just some other asset, which I think most Bitcoiners, their worldview of Bitcoin is that like that at Bitcoin's peak, it's a very relevant asset amongst other assets. And what I would argue is that like that belief is fundamentally like it cannot exist in a world where you also believe that Bitcoin's a paradigm shift. Like, so if Bitcoin is a paradigm shift, that actually makes paradigm number three the least likely, because that pretty much says Bitcoin, that scenario says Bitcoin is not a paradigm shift. It's not a paradigm shift in value transfer. It's not a paradigm shift in value communication. Maybe it's just a highly competitive scarce asset. That's not a paradigm shift. That doesn't change the game where everyone else has to adapt to it. So if Bitcoin, you can't hold the idea that Bitcoin's a paradigm shift and also believe in, like, let's say Bitcoin is successful but not hyper Bitcoinization. I just don't think that those things go together. So the only two scenarios if Bitcoin's a paradigm shift is, okay, like what does hyper Bitcoinization look like? Or like what the fuck do you do if Bitcoin fails? And the answer to that is you probably want guns. But so on one hand is get guns, and then what does Bitcoin look like? What does the world look like with hyper Bitcoinization? Okay, well if Bitcoin's a paradigm shift in value communication, that and value organization and how we manage ourselves, I think Bitcoiners will agree that if Bitcoin's a paradigm shift, that's how it is a paradigm shift. Then not only is it infinity divided by 21 million, but Bitcoin also makes infinity get bigger because it increases human prosperity, increases our ability to create value. But if it's a paradigm shift, infinity doesn't increase marginally. Infinity increases exponentially because that's what paradigm shifts do, right? Like if you look at what the world looked like pre-electrification to now, Like, not only could no one back then like tell you what the world was going to look like post electrification, but like it's exponentially more productive than it was before. So like it's hard for us to be like look at ourselves and be like, hey, we live in an ancient world with ancient technology from a future perspective, and Bitcoin's a paradigm shift that unleashes that future world. But if it in fact is a paradigm shift, then the only way to think about the future is that it's going to make infinity exponentially bigger. And therefore, when you try to like think through what is infinity divided by 21 million, it has to be exponentially bigger than you could ever imagine. Because that's what paradigm shifts divided by finite scarce ledger, means. So I'm just like, I know I just like went on a huge tangent, but like, I hope that makes sense.
I would pay for you to keep going for another 3 hours, but the way that you described it, I think is very accurate. I do believe Bitcoin's success is black and white. I do think it's binary, so to speak, right? It's either going to go forever, Laura, or this thing fails. Now, let's kind of because there's a lot to unpack there, but let's break down one of the first elements. You say Bitcoin's incentive structures break. So, I'm sure you've gone down this rabbit hole. Clearly, you've put some thought into this. Throw some ideas. What would that mean? What would that entail if something like that were to happen?
Okay. So the best way that I think through like how Bitcoin works, like the way that I think about it is Satoshi came up with a scientific discovery / invention that allowed us to take a cocktail of things and formulate a provably scarce finite amount of units that are, it goes beyond gold because they're synthetically scarce. They're not just naturally scarce. So gold was the ultimate naturally scarce thing. So Satoshi came up with a scientific innovation that created this. So it's like, this is something that was never possible before Satoshi's invention. And the whole thing it's constantly in motion. And because it effectively it pays people to keep it alive. So if for whatever reason, the mechanism in which it can pay people to keep it alive breaks down, that's what I'm saying is like that's Bitcoin, like its incentive structure breaking down. I think that is like if Bitcoin were to fail, that's the highest likely reason why it has failed of all the reasons why it could fail or become irrelevant because of something else. Again, I think like if you're being honest, you have to like open the chance like Bitcoin could be made irrelevant. Like I don't think like it could be. Like I think it's very unlikely that happens, but like it could be. And part of that is like Bitcoin's incentive structure breaks. That's really the shitcoiner argument. The shitcoiner argument is buy my shitcoin because it does Bitcoin better and Bitcoin's incentive structure will break in the future. And so that's why you need to make the compromises to and get my shitcoin. Like that's the summarization of every shitcoin argument effectively. It's my shitcoin is this way and it's better because of these changes because Bitcoin's broken fundamentally in the future.
Gotcha. Interesting. Okay. So that is one scenario. Let's talk more about the paradigm shift. What gets me really, really excited. One of the things that I remember you told me, I think you were nice enough to let me record an episode of IRL in the Bitcoin magazine offices in Nashville.
That was a fun trip when you were in Nash, you and Sophie.
That was yeah, man, we had a great time. We'll be there soon. Next year for the next conference. So, but it was very kind of you to let me record an episode there. And I remember one of the things you told me, and it never left my mind, which was it changes your operating system, changes your mindset. And it's a talking point that I've used a lot because it's such a great way of describing it, right? People are on this like fiat nihilistic inflationary mindset. And then, you know, like the NPC meme, you take out the chip and then you put in the Bitcoin chip. And then all of a sudden you're on a deflationary, optimistic, happier mindset. It's like it just changes the world completely. And the vast majority of people have not woken up to that. So I don't know if you want to add to that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, look, I just want to preface this that if you accept that it's impossible to be bullish enough and that it's impossible to accurately predict where Bitcoin's going to go, then you start making predictions differently. And I think your predictions are based off of like mental models. So I think it's super important to have like mental models for how you think Bitcoin's going to play out, because that's the only way to like even have remotely directionally correct mental model or predictions. So all of us are in the game of predicting what Bitcoin's going to do because we're all hodling to have some sort of personal outcome, beneficiary outcome. So that means that you got to have good mental models for Bitcoin if you want to have the most Bitcoin in the future. So I think one of the best ways to view Bitcoin, especially as a paradigm shift, it's like a paradigm shift in how we think about money and how we think about value, and that's part of why Infinity gets bigger, because it's like we upgraded our mental model, or we upgraded our mental operating system. All money is an operating system. Like the economists implicitly say this when they say that we're targeting this inflation rate because it's going to make people behave a certain way, right? It's like your incentive system. It is an operating system for making decisions about your value, making your decisions about your time, as the Austrians would say. So, you know, if everyone is operating on the dollar operating system or some version of the dollar operating system, since pretty much all fiats are just kind of like, they're kind of like shitty add-ons to the dollar system. And Bitcoin is like a whole new, brand new monetary system completely outside of that. And then we've all like anecdotally talked about how like when you adopt Bitcoin, you behave differently, you start seeing the world differently, you start seeing health differently, you start seeing priorities differently, you start seeing entrepreneurship differently, you start seeing opportunity differently. It changes everything, right? So like that's anecdotal, but I would say from a mental model perspective is like it's like you upgraded your mental model, you upgraded your mental operating system. Another good way of like articulating this is Parker Lewis. He says Bitcoin is counterintuitive and then Bitcoin's hyperintuitive. So I would say is like, yeah, so when you are operating on the fiat mindset, Bitcoin's super counterintuitive. But once you put in the work and you go far enough down the rabbit hole that you can upgrade your operating system and switch to Bitcoin, all of a sudden it becomes hyper-intuitive because you're operating on the Bitcoin mindset. So the fact that people change their behavior and become arguably more successful when they adopt Bitcoin, that's anecdotal. I think it's like a good sign that Bitcoin's actually a paradigm shift. Like I think it's just good anecdotal evidence, and I see it everywhere. So there's a reason I'm bullish is because I think I'm just being a consistent Bitcoiner. That is all, dude. Like all these Bitcoiners are LARPing that Bitcoin's a paradigm shift. I agree, except I actually think I'm thinking through like what are the implications of that, given hyper Bitcoinization and Bitcoin being a quote unquote paradigm shift.
Gotcha. And yeah, I completely agree. I think look, I don't think it's a coincidence that the first country that made Bitcoin legal tender, they fixed the base layer of society. Therefore, they fixed the incentive structure. I don't think it's a coincidence that president actually did the things that he said he was going to do if he were to get elected. Not to mention the fact that he's one of the most popular presidents in the Americas. I think that's an example of what you're saying. And of course, what it's done to my life personally, what it's done to Opti's life, what it's done to my family's life, what it's done to just Bitcoiners around me, right? Like, that saying, like Bitcoin truly fixes this. It does. It gives you hope for the future. It gives you optimism for the future, where perhaps you might have not had in the past. So what's your timeline on this, CK? Because I think that's another thing that, we've like what I got in 2016. I've been here for a minute, but like every single day working in Bitcoin is effing brutal, bro. Okay. They don't call it the Bitcoin roller coaster for no reason. You work at a Bitcoin company, you feel this. I work at 2 Bitcoin companies, and you feel the impact 2 times. And it is such a roller coaster ride. I feel
2
like
times the fires, bro.
bro, it literally, I wake up in the morning and I'm like, holy cow, like I can't, I'm saying it anyways. I'll
And
wake
you
up.
still do a show every fucking day, bro.
Yeah. I'll
So
wake up at 2 a.m. and I'm like, oh my God, is Corey on Slack type of thing. So like, yeah, bro, it's, but it's super, super purposeful. It's super, super, you felt this, bro. You worked at, the largest Bitcoin only media organization in the world. It's super fulfilling work, but it is totally a grind. And when you were talking about that vacation, you said, I took 6 weeks. I don't even know what that feels like, bro. You say that? I'm like, I don't even know. I think I took 5 days off without, wanting to how did you resist your Slack addiction? What did you do? You just threw your phone away?
I deleted Slack off my phone.
Okay.
I've taken like 2-3 week vacations while working at Bitcoin Magazine, but I've always had a
Yeah.
Slack addiction.
Yeah.
But no, yeah. So like, I when you leave a company, like they take away your authentication privileges to get into the whole tech stack. So yeah, and then I just deleted all the apps that I used to use, and then I pretty much, I joined HRF, shortly after like giving notice to Bitcoin Magazine, in terms of like I signed the documentation, stuff like that. But I was like, hey, just don't give me an email, don't talk to me. Like I'm starting at this date. Like I don't want to hear from you until then. And they respected that. And dude, holy shit. I like was like having like kind of personal calls with Bitcoiners that worked with me at Bitcoin Magazine, and a number of those calls people were like, "Man, you look so relaxed," and I was like, "I am." But like, part of like my journey in leaving Bitcoin Magazine is like at the end of it, like I went from hosting like 3 shows at the same time to like now I'm hosting 0 shows, right? So like, there's no way that you like get all the way there unless you like fully exit kind of all your obligations.
Yeah. Yeah. I got you. Well, man, holy cow. Okay. So what is the timeline here, CK? How
Oh
long is
yeah,
this
so yeah,
paradigm? How
we're
long is
jumping
this?
all around.
How long is this? I know we haven't caught up in a while. We're catching up live on,
Yeah, catching up and talking bullishness simultaneously. So dude, like I'm on record saying I think it's this decade, now that we're entering closer to Bitcoin, now that we're getting closer to 2024, which is like, close to 50% through this decade. Maybe I see this decade as like the mental paradigm shift for the world, and then next decade is kind of like the when building on Bitcoin really starts. Um, I think like honestly, we're way earlier than most Bitcoiners think we are. So like in terms of raw numbers, we're way earlier. Definitely less than 1% of real Bitcoin adoption in terms of global numbers. But I think Bitcoin's also going to like come way faster than we think. It really is going to be like gradually, gradually, gradually. So effing painful, so effing painful. Just like every every bull market, bear market vibe is like almost like a microcosm of like what that giant, what the giant green candle of hyper Bitcoinization is going to look like. But really, it's like it's just slow, 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 slow grind, and then the hyper adoption phase. And ultimately, if I'm right, if we are less than 1% adoption, that means with all this price action that's already happened and all the Bitcoin that's already been mined, that if you look at the S curve of adoption, so you can just Google that right now, technological S curve of adoption, really like the S is like a pretty shallow S in terms of like it's long in fat. And then the part where it goes from the bottom of the S to the top of the S, that is time wise is a very short period in like the total S. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that, yeah. So
Where are we, CK?
if we're less than 1%, we're before the innovators
Oh God.
area, right? Like we're before the innovators.
Bunker down, Opti.
Yeah, like that means everything that we've seen has been nothing. Like if you take a your mouse and you just like hover over the early majority, late majority stage, like that's the mega candle. Right here. That's like a year of just like the world flipping or whatever. But like, we got, honestly, like with as long as the things have been going so far, just trying to like map that over, like this could be like 10 years. So this like early majority. So maybe the 30s are the early majority to late majority.
Gotcha.
Like I think like this decade, like we'll probably get to the early adopter level, which is like 10% global adoption. And honestly, like I would not be shocked if it was like all packed 2027, 2028, 2029. If like the majority of like adoption this decade happens right at the end.
Yeah, basically the years after the next halving. So not this halving, the next one.
And I mean, dude, like if you take into account how many Bitcoin have been mined, how early we are, like just raw people wise, and then like, how far we need to go in terms of total market penetration, divided by 21 million, divided by a million coins left to be mined, however many Satoshis that is, like, just like we can't even begin to comprehend how much a value of a sat is going to be on the other side of the S.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I remember having a conversation with Luke Broyles, and he was trying to explain to me how it's hard for human beings to understand exponentials. Our minds just don't, like, we can't wrap our opties. All right, last question. I do want to be respectful of CK's time. We are getting close to the top of the hour. Opti asks, so is 37 sats still generational wealth? Question mark, exclamation mark, question mark.
The answer is yes. Like in the case that hyper Bitcoinization happens, then absolutely. And I'll explain why 37 sats. So 37 sats is the block subsidy in 95 years. And so the idea behind that is that, okay, if hyper Bitcoinization happens and the arc of human prosperity continues, then it's fair to say that all we know, like we don't know what the fees are going to be like. We don't know what the future Bitcoin stack is going to look like, but we do know that 95 years, 37 sats will be the block subsidy. So we know that if Bitcoin works, more hashes than we can comprehend will be pointed at getting those 37 sats. So therefore, and again, with the arc of human innovation and prosperity over time in an optimistic worldview, I think it's fair to say that, over the course of last 95 years, like the common man in the West lives a higher quality of life than a king 95 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Like people don't realize that 95 years ago, wasn't that long ago, that we were at the beginning of World War I. There was still kings and heiresses and theocracy and all this stuff in Europe. Like democracy in Europe, like that's less than 100 years old, y'all. So Bitcoin, like we don't even get out of the first phase of Bitcoin for 100 years. But in 95 years, given the arc of, progress, I think it's safe to say that like the average human life quality will increase exponentially. And if Bitcoin continues to work, if the game theory holds up and the block subsidy is 37 sats, then way more hashes are going to be pointed at it. So in today's wealth, yeah, absolutely. 37 sats in 95 years will be generational wealth for what we interpret as generational wealth. Maybe actually then it will be generational wealth as well, because I personally think we're going sub-sat in terms of like, we're going to have to keep dividing it down in order to, to keep, scaling to the level of commerce that, we're going to get to in the future. We're talking about micro payments across, AI networks, like who knows? That's the beginning of like what we're predicting, right? So we're just beginning to get into like what the future holds, and I think we're going lower than Sats. So maybe 37 Sats will be like 37 million in terms of like what we're denominating shit in the future, and that guess what 1 Bitcoin is. So that's sovereign status.
All right, guys, you heard it here. That it's what CK just said. His rant is why you ain't bullish enough. Anyways, guys, check out CK. You can follow him at CK__ Snarks on Bitcoin Twitter. I'm absolutely sure you have a Noster as well. CK, it's an absolute honor for you to join us today on Simply Bitcoin IRL. Really, really appreciate you, brother, and hope to see you in the flesh soon in Nashville or something.
Or something. Hey, we'll link up offline and see if we can organize something. Yeah, Noster. Check out primal.net/CK. I got that juicy primal URL. So yeah, you can find me there.
Sniped it. All right. Well, CK, thank you so much. Like I said, absolute honor for you to join us today. Guys, if you enjoyed the show, you know what to do. Smash that like button. Consider subscribing. We'll be back tomorrow, 12:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, for another episode of Simply Bitcoin Live. Peace out, everybody.